I'm Jennifer Coffey, in case you are new to these webinars or just SIG Network. I oversee the State Personnel Development Grant Program. I am working alongside Kelsey Live, who is at SIG Network at University of Oregon. And she works alongside John Lind, who we don't see so much anymore, but who is still with us and is going to be helping Kelsey and myself put together a team of volunteers to plan for our program area meeting. Now, the program area meeting takes place at the Project Directors Conference, which this year is the Project Directors / Leadership Conference, all virtual. It will be a 90-minute meeting. And of course, we want to make it very useful for you. And so that's why we asked for a group of volunteers who could help us plan the content. Last year, we heard from the Georgia SPDIG and the Illinois SPDIG, and we heard about, from Illinois SPDIG, about MTSS practices that took into considerations the efficiencies and the effect we needed to respond to COVID. And we heard from the Georgia SPDIG about family engagement and communications. So they were very, very responsive, I hope, to the context we were in at that time. We will likely try to have something that is just as responsive to the context of now. So please consider volunteering for that planning group. I'm going to put my email in the chat in case you don't have it, and you can just email me with your interest. We'll take care of that. All right, so the second question is your state providing tutoring or looking at large-scale tutoring in response to, oh, of course. I'm gonna type that in. And that was another state had asked that question. All right, so I put it in the chat. Thank you everyone who's responding to the My Credential question. If you have anything to share about the tutoring, that'd be great. Really appreciate it. And let's get on with today. So we have two different topics today, both I think really important for our work. One is about strengthening family partnerships through MTSS, through a multi-tiered system of support. And the other is about quality professional development and thinking about whether the content that you're trying to provide skills in, if you are staying true to the content that you were to present in the training. And our team, Patty and Amy, are going to be talking about how to do that, and specifically how they do it with their social emotional learning professional development. So that's Amy Gomer-Erickson and Patty Noonan. But we're going to start with Kimberly Breen, who most of you have seen present before because she's presented recently on a director's webinar. She has a lot of different areas of specialty, and today we're having her dig into family partnerships and specifically thinking about family partnerships in MTSS. And she's also going to be talking about the dual capacity framework, which some of you know about, but is a really effective way of thinking about family engagement, family partnership. And so I'll have her talk a little bit about herself. We've spoken before, but long introductions are boring, and I turn them off. And I think it's more interesting to hear from the person. But Kimberly, we're so glad you're with us again, and I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome, thank you. And can you see this front slide?
Yes, I can.
Awesome, all right. So thank you, I'm happy to be here. I'm Kimberly Breen. I also hate doing my own introduction. So I put some points here in case there are some resources or areas you want to check out, some groups I'm affiliated with. And as Jennifer said, I'm really grateful to have spent really like my life as an adult somehow interacting with and supporting others with some version of a multi-tiered system of support. So I started with PBIS work about 20 years ago, like in some fun, exciting ways. I was a school counselor, school psychologist, but I really spent most of my time recently in the last 15 or so years supporting state level, county level, district level, and still sometimes some school level implementation. I'm also the parent of now a 12-year-old who has autism. which definitely let me sort of sit on the other side of the table, literally, and get to observe processes that, sometimes I'll bring a little bit of that lens into my work when I'm talking about family partnerships. But I'm also was an aunt at a pretty young age. And so I know it might be strange, but I got to interact with the educational system in my teens while my sisters were bringing their children through the school system. So I hope all of that just kind of makes what I share on this. I hope what you'll experience today is that there can be lots of great presentations and trainings on family partnerships. I'm still very much a learner. I sit in and learn from as many folks as I can all the time. And I'm aware that, and thank you guys for helping folks mute, and if we're able to help mute others. I'm aware that for a while when I was doing this work, we'd get these like long lists of practices that you could do to improve partnerships with families. And it makes me think sort of like this analogy of, this really dry, hard earth. And, you like dump a bucket of water on it and the water just kind of, rolls off. The soil is too hard and too dry for it to really absorb in. And I feel like on some levels, we need to ready the systems to make good use of the practices. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is this idea of the systems part of implementing family partnerships. And I'm barely at all going to talk about family partnership practices. And part of that is Jennifer told me just recently, you all had some exceptional presentations with some folks doing exceptional work around family partnerships. So we hope this feels complimentary. We do wish you all well. We know that these times are uniquely challenging. So I greatly appreciate your physical presence and your mental and emotional presence in today's time with me. I have about like 40 more minutes with you. We're going to pause a few times and have large group dialogue where you can also type into the chat box. I'd ask you to sort of get ready. If you're the kind of person, you might not mind reading a quote here and there for me. Be ready to unmute, and then I'd love to have your voice come into the room and help me maybe read a few things to the group. And then of course, in chat and verbally, I'd love for folks to interact. I consciously chose not to do breakout rooms with you all because I feel like, and I've only been with you a couple times, but I feel like the group really does appreciate learning from each other in this group. And so as long as you're willing to be vocal, then we won't go into breakout rooms. We'll just kind of chat and dialogue a bit together. So as I said, I'm going to focus on systems and not really go into the practices, in part because maybe you already have tons of great practices already, in part because maybe you already know about a lot of those, but like you're still not being able to get it to sink in for whatever reasons. And in part because we've recently covered those with your group. So I always use these three constructs no matter what I'm doing. I was first introduced to these through the National Center on Positive Behavior Support, but I joke that systems, data, and practices are important for anything you're doing. So we might have company this weekend and I'm thinking, how many people, how much of what do we need? What are the games and things we'll do in the backyard? And how do I support our team, me and my husband, in like implementing a party, right? Do I need to get a babysitter to come help me? So those would be the systems. So the systems are the how. How are we going to pull off this party? How are we going to implement these great practices for families? How are we going to use the data, or how are we going to do what the data says we need to do? So I see all three of these things as necessary, no matter what kind of thing you're trying to pull off. And so we gave you a worksheet. I sent a Google folder with the PowerPoint for today. Don't look ahead if you don't mind. Please don't open the PowerPoint yet. I prefer you to stay with me, and then you have the PowerPoint for later. I'm okay with everyone using any and all of the PowerPoint that I shared. I keep them in PowerPoint form so that you can present them yourself if you'd like. But in there, you have this worksheet. And so I use this worksheet for basically everything I do. And it's just this idea of, as you're listening here right now today to my session and to the next session, what are you hearing that relates to systems, relates to data, relates to practices? Which areas maybe do you have strengths or needs in? So we hope that this will be a helpful tool for you today or beyond today. And so to make sure we're all on the same page about, what is it we're talking about, I'm going to really help us sort of define systems in a minute, but the outcome of those systems should be to do this. So this is my favorite definition of family partnerships. Would anyone want to read this for me? You would start with systems that.
I can
Sure.
read it. Systems that create family partnerships where families and school staff are co-equal partners, engage in shared work and joint planning, and focus on promoting positive child outcomes through a strengths-based approach.
Thank you so much, Lou. Does any part of that specifically connect with you, any of those words or phrases? And it's okay if not.
So this is an area of growth in our tiered systems. It's one of our essential components, but actually putting it into practice with districts is definitely ongoing challenge that we're trying to refine.
Totally. Got it. No, I appreciate that. And Lou, like the good, bad news is you are in really excellent company. I find that this is the most, you know, if you look at any educational system, the school, district, county, state level, the part that I've noticed for over 10 years that always needs a little bit more is this. Family partnerships always could use like a little more water, a little more love. So that's quite common. Thank you so much for reading that for me. I'm going to ask everyone to consider like, what's your favorite definition of family partnerships, or make your own for your site. And it's like, what do you value regarding family partnerships? I love this because I love this idea of co-equal. You know, equity is a huge issue that folks are talking about right now. But equity has always been present, not just with our interactions with students, but challenges with equity in terms of how we interact with families. So if you are working on culturally responsive work, if you're trying to improve equity, that means you want to value and take care of family partnerships. They go hand in hand. So co-equal, removing some of that power differential, joint planning. So the biggest thing, like in case you zone out and you don't hear anything else I say, the biggest thing I'd love for you to take away is this idea of, when you are planning things to do for families, are you doing it with families? So joint planning is the number one most important thing you could do. I might say that more than once, so take that a little bit lightly. But it's a huge part of the work, because sometimes we plan a party for people we don't know that well, right? But if you want to plan the party with those people, and then we're more likely to get a hit. So, and then of course, being strength-based is really, really important as well. So that'll be the definition we work off of today, but of course you're welcome to use other definitions that you're working towards with this. And so I gave you another, with not for, thank you so much. So, and so, right there, I was kind of going fast, but this idea of both, I would say, there are things, it's more about doing with, exactly. But sometimes it's like, how are we doing it with to support families? We'll talk a little bit about that today. And then sometimes it's doing with so that we can like get out of their way and let families do what they need and want to do. And, you know, so there's like, it's kind of 4-dimensional there. So I really appreciate that in the chat box. Thank you. In the folder, I gave you this resource from the Global Family Research Project. And there's like a 1-pager here that I think is really helpful. So if you look here on the side with the 2 columns, just take a peek at what we're talking about, shifting from to. And so this again is going to kind of affect the essence of family partnerships. And so I feel like you can use these to test against any of the practices you have going on. So children learn only at school to children learn anywhere, anytime. So are we systematically empowering and educating families for how to be co-educators, how to support reading at home, right? Like, are we assuming learning only happens at school? Or are we actually empowering others to also help with learning in other places? This is the main one we're going to talk about today. The second one, random acts of family engagement. 2, and would anyone be willing to read what's written in that second green rectangle? We're going to shift from random acts of family engagement to
continuous family engagement that starts early and lasts along a child's entire learning pathway.
Thank you. So we're looking at like continuous, and today we're going to add this idea systemic and systematic. Thank you so much for being willing to help read there. So here, I'd love to just have a very quick dialogue with folks. You're welcome to just think about these things on your own, take your own notes. It's all good. You know, we don't have to hear from you. You can just use this as time to be thinking. You also could be typing into the chat box as you're connecting to these questions. And then of course you have an open invitation to also unmute. So this is like the pre-assessment-ish. We're going to talk about systems here in our brief time together. But when you think, like, what do you think of when you hear this idea of systems for family partnerships? And could you think of any examples of systematized family partnerships? So these could be things that you and your site are already doing, or that you used to do, or you heard of, or you would like to do. So you're thinking like, what would systems really mean as it relates to family partnerships? And I'm gonna say one more thing and then I'll pause and folks can unmute if you'd like, or type into the chat. My argument is, when we talk about family partnerships, we are almost solely talking about practices. So almost everything I hear about, see, read about family partnerships lays heavily on the practices, the things we do with and for families, but not the system. And then I would argue also, you see very little around data-based decision-making within family partnerships. So Jennifer, if that's something your group wants to talk about another time, I'd love to follow the same format, but talk about data as it relates to family partnerships within an MTSS, where today we'll focus more on the system piece. So thanks folks for typing into the chat box. Everyone is welcome to continue to type in. And then whenever I see you, let me pause real quick. Did anyone want to unmute? And it's always that awkward little moment, and it's all good. So I'm going to read a few things from the chat, and then if you wanted to talk, you'll just unmute here in a second. So I love what I'm seeing in the chat box. When I hear systems for family partnerships, I feel hopeful. That makes me so happy. Thank you for sharing that. I agree actually on that. I never thought of it that way. Shared vision developed with families based on shared outcomes. Awesome. So when you think of systems, you're thinking sort of the vision, like the big picture of it, doing it with families, right? Kind of the bigger, and that kind of goes to this next one, like infrastructure maybe. So you're thinking, would it be part of the broad structure and or like lay out the details within for infrastructure? I love all those comments. We're of course going to go deeper today into what this is, but I love just getting you thinking about this for a moment. So I see shared practices, policies, please. Go ahead. Does someone want to unmute? No, that's okay.
Oh, I did. I'm sorry. This is Annetta, Montana.
Please.
When I think of this, the definition you gave us, it just made me all giddy. But there is a slow but impactful movement. Many of the schools I serve, all of the schools I serve are neck deep in trauma. And so this new movement, and it's based on what you have in that statement, strength-based. And so the simplified process is that, yes, we still provide, trauma-informed, trauma-based. We give that basic understanding. But that the continuation, whether we're working with the families or the students or the staff, but the continuation of always focusing on the trauma actually keeps that trauma rolling. And so the strength-based approach to that, which would be perfect with what you're talking about, is called healing-centered engagement.
Nice.
So that's, if you want more, you can Google it. I'll type that in the chat. So that it just all was like a piece, a missing piece. So thank you.
Love it. Annette, thank you so much for sharing that. Thanks for typing into the chat. I'm sure a bunch of people will explore that further. It makes such great sense. And everyone, being asset-based is also one way of being culturally responsive. So that's great, right? You're being culturally responsive and healing informed. And then like this idea of student-centered or family-centered, which is even like a whole nother piece of it. I feel you like putting all that together there. So thank you for sharing that. And for folks to be thinking of how do we, so we're going to get into this more today, but how do you actually use healing informed practices in how you partner with families, right? That's what I hear. And it's almost this meta, this like doing the thing that we're teaching and supporting other people to do as we do it. So we're going to go a little deeper. I see, Tom, would you want to verbally share briefly? And if not, I'll read what you wrote here in the chat.
Sure. My comment was systems makes me think of an organized set of resources, activities, and feedback loops of information decision-making. For me, that sort of resonates with the way that capacity is defined in CSEP's active implementation frameworks and measured with things like the district capacity assessment. So family partnerships can be something that you set capacity for on its own, or it could be a component, for example, of implementing another an evidence-based practice. For example, in Minnesota, it's been Check and Connect. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you. And maybe the ultimate answer is both, right? Embedded within, and then that system, and then also a system of, right? Because
Exactly.
systems, right? So by definition, and some people struggle with this, by definition, systems are made up of systems. So your human body is made up of systems and subsystems, like almost, infinitely deep. So, and that goes for any system if you think about it. So thank you so much, Tom, for putting that out there. So one way I want us to think of systems today is this idea of a multi-tiered system, right? So many of you have been probably pretty deep in your MTSS. It's this idea of 3 tiers of support. So let's think of a 3-tiered system of support for family partnerships. Like, what would that look like, right? So a multi-tiered system of family partnerships and support. And then, of course, MTSS lets us run all these other things through it. So as to the point made earlier around being healing centered, you would take social emotional learning, social emotional practices, and embed them within your 3-tiered system of family partnerships. So not only would we, for example, want to teach all families about SEL and what it means at school and what we're doing, but we'd also want to empower all families to potentially use SEL at home if they chose. And we'd also want to invite all families, whoever was interested, if that was an area of strength for them, they might want to help us do stuff. They might want to be on the team. They might want to be leading the work themselves, right? Because that's what they connect with. So I use the definition for MTSS to basically be this structure, which is talking about duration, intensity, and frequency increasing as you go up. And then I use this for every kind of stakeholder and group. I don't have like a different definition for students, staff, and families. I think it's the same definition. And it is based on, to the point earlier, not just needs, but also strengths. So I'll give you an example today about how, based on a family member's strengths, we might partner with them at tier 2 or tier 3. So I'm afraid that as much as we still struggle not to be deficit driven with students, I think our family partnership systems are pretty deficit driven. So, think of like, how often are families identified as being great family leaders, mentors, and then leveraged within the system to help improve the system, right? How often are we doing that? All right, I'd love people to take a peek at these 3 very loose general definitions of systems. I feel like I have to do this when we talk about systems because it can feel like this amorphous word. Anyone want to read their favorite one? Take a peek at the 3 definitions. I'll let you guys read them instead of reading them to you. I'm peeking on our chat box.
Hi guys. A set of principles or procedures according to which something is done, an organized method. Emphasis on the word organized.
You like that? Organized, right? Thank you, Jen. I love that. Anyone want to comment on the same or another one?
I like the third one, an organized, purposeful structure that consists of interrelated and interdependent elements, because I think I like to stress the word purposeful, that we are engaging, we're intentional in our engagement of families. And I like the interdependent elements because it's not just families, right? We're talking about community members when necessary. We're talking about extended family members. So I like that. Stress on purposeful.
You convinced Jen. I think you brought Jen over to the 3rd definition. So thank you for that. And I love that too. And this kind of goes a little bit deeper. Remember, you guys will have these slides if you want to use them with others, but it just gives a little bit of a structure to have a conversation with people. So for example, like informative, what do the inputs and outputs look like? That's systems talk, right? What information comes in, what information goes out? Is it regular? Is it predictable? Is it seamless? Does it feel fluid, or is it choppy? Is it unpredictable, unknown? Is it really clear that our family partnership system is mutually beneficial? Is it really clear that it's as beneficial to the families as it is to the educators or the school and the students? And does it feel like it's part of one whole? I'll tell you, one of the things I've seen recently that's so unfortunate is districts and sites have invested in hiring family liaisons, which is so important and so necessary. And then in many sites, they are making sure those folks are at least bilingual, which is awesome and totally necessary. But then they sort of also treat those folks like the translators. So now they have almost like a double duty job. Of course, translation ends up, being the priority over partnership work. And then the other thing that happens is like the administrators and everyone else sort of tag out. And they're like, oh, our family liaisons have that. And that's not, they were supposed to add value, right? We were supposed to add the value to the principal still working hard to reach out and the teacher still working hard and everyone working hard, but we add. If everyone else stops what they were doing and it's all on the liaison, we may be back to square one or even behind. So, okay, because I feel like systems can be amorphous, I'm going to show this brief video on systems. What I want to say about this is, I think it'll grab your attention. So please do watch and listen, but try to look at the words that are coming up on the sides of the screen. They're easy to miss because you're going to be watching what the woman does in the middle with the blocks. Just try to look at those notes on the side. You can even write down some of those words if you'd like. This is about systems, but I hope you feel it has a pretty nice connection when we talk about systems and families. As soon as I press play, if it seems like anything's wrong, please, Jennifer or someone unmute and tell me.
A Sufi story tells of a village of blind men. One day, a new creature arrived. Each of the blind men grasped one part of it and declared that they knew what it was. A snake? A rug? Columns? But by only experiencing one part of it, each was wrong. In our everyday lives, we also tend to look at things in parts rather than experiencing the world as a whole. This is not surprising, as such divisions start early on in school, where we are divided into a range of subjects. Yet, the world is much more complex, and if we are to understand its complexity, we need to think about the greater picture. We have to think in systems. Let's illustrate this with a universal example. Love. Do you love me? Yes. But how much? In our love systems, the amount of love is always crucial. Some things help love to grow, such as laughter and good conversation. However, the amount of love can also diminish, such as after a bad argument. Thankfully, we do have precious moments in life, like a honeymoon, where we ensure that love is strengthened. While in the everyday, we tend to settle for a sweet harmony. Indeed, our love systems are extremely sensitive. In some cases, tiny actions can have a huge effect. While others take some time to manifest. Yet love doesn't just exist between two people, it's much more than that. Love also exists between brothers and sisters, kids and parents, within family circles, and also among friends and wider communities. In reality, love connects us all. However, we often damage love by repeating the same mistakes and not recognizing unintended consequences. For example, grounding a naughty child to teach good behavior could make them even more rebellious. Sometimes, even small arguments can turn into large and messy fights. As adults, we often promise to call our parents more, but this can soon fade as time passes. We can also become fixed to distractions, not realizing that this may be creating deeper disconnects in a relationship. And all too often, we lose sight of what really makes us happy. Although we all tend to make such mistakes in love, there are wisdoms that can guide us towards systemic solutions. So, why don't we use such wisdoms to understand more complex systems and not only love?
All right. I hope you liked that video. I loved it. I'd love to give it a chance to talk about it a bit, but as you're talking about it a bit with us, I really love this quote, which is the opposite of systems. It's kind of like pointing out where our challenge is. So would anyone be willing to read Random Acts of Engagement? And then we'll open up to have a brief chat about this quote and video.
Sure. Random acts of engagement. Despite the rich evidence and support for family engagement in education, schools continue to struggle to move beyond random acts of engagement to systemic, integrated, effective, and sustainable family engagement practices that are central to school-based initiatives and improvement efforts.
Awesome. Kate, thank you so much. You don't have to stay with me, but you're welcome to comment if you'd like. Did that phrase like random acts of engagement kind of pique your interest? Because I love how that's said. And doesn't it make you think of all these times and places where like the best intention, they're like, oh, we'll do a Thursday family fun night. And then like the next month that's gone, right? And it's like, oh, we need to survey our families in the next month. And it just feels like all these attempts, but not really interconnected. So please.
So my immediate thoughts were around the stories that we hear very often in our LEAs, that this type of engagement is specific to a person or a group of people. So it is kept alive, so to speak. And then once that person moves on to another position or moves into a different school, that all that work leaves with them.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that, but you know what? I would push back just a tiny bit on that to say, my guess is if it's person-centered, that human has beautiful relationships with about 20% of the stakeholder group, but not 100%, because that's in order to get 100% or even 80, right? 80% of families reached, or even maybe 50, you have to take that beautiful human and systematize what they do. Because like one person couldn't, right? Do. So thank you. I love that. Other comments, questions, thoughts about the video and or about this quote?
You know, I was thinking sometimes I love this random acts of engagement. Sometimes we're doing things that to the organizers make sense and the connections are there, but if the participants don't get it, it's not clear to the participants, it loses a bit of its effectiveness, I think.
Totally. Thank you. And that's that idea, Sarah, right? That like planning with real families, like doing with real families is part of it for sure. Lou, please.
So what this made me think of is actually the opportunity that's in front of us is that I think, and what's been shared by some of our districts is that families have been more engaged than before with the spotlight on the heroic efforts of teachers and really the kind of changing the definition of what schools offer to families. So I think that it would be, we would lose an opportunity if we didn't kind of preserve some of the structures that we've learned from during the pandemic going forward.
Yes, I could not agree more. Even like giving the opportunities for families to join a meeting virtually instead of in person, and making these little mini videos that are shared. And that was a comment that was made earlier on, like how to reach more families through technology, even if they're not masters of technology, there's ways. So I love that you're saying that. So it's like, well, let's learn from some of the practices that were done during this unique time and then systematize those practices so that they keep happening, even if those wonderful people come and go. Of course, people always matter and they'll make it, can make it better, but how do we systematize it? So I want to go like a tiny bit deeper on this challenge. I'm going to leave you guys with 3 constructs, and I think they're all going to be constructs you already kind of know. So I hope what I'm doing is like setting the stage, reminding you about these 3 constructs and like setting you free to implement them regarding family partnerships. So this is one big quote, and it's separated out by many citations within. It's really powerful concept here. I love this quote. It's gonna make us feel a little uncomfortable maybe, and I really do challenge people around the conversation of family partnerships to be willing to see where the problems are, because we kind of have to see where the problems are in order to really come up with genuine solutions. Anyone willing to read this long quote for me? I'll give a brief break because it's okay if it feels like it's too much. And then if so, I can do it. You would skip all the citations and just start with increasingly.
I can read it.
Thank you.
Increasingly, staff and leaders from all youth serving systems, including education, mental health, child welfare, juvenile justice, disabilities, primary health care, and others are recognizing the paradigm of professional experts telling youth and families what they should be doing is not effective.
Thank you so much, Brandy. Are you willing to keep going?
Yes. This directive hierarchical model suggests superiority of the professional over the student or family member, promotes distance in the relationship and negative reactions and feelings, and decreases the likelihood of positive change occurring. Yet, these models perpetuate, as in reality, youth and families have little voice about what happens in the systems they participate in.
Thank you so much, Brandy. I so appreciate that. It's big. I hope like if you're really all hearing that, it feels like kind of big. And so I kind of summarize that this way. So people ask me all the time, they're like, so if I like, what's the one thing I could do to improve family partnerships? And like, I want to be careful with this with everyone, but I do want to know from where I stand, and we all stand in different places, I hear a lot of embedded bias when I hear people talk to me about struggling with family partnerships, and it's often some embedded bias around like economic differences, neighborhood differences, cultural differences, race differences, even if maybe people aren't consciously aware of that. And it's this idea of like them versus us, the families are different. And so if I have to say one thing to people, I say, so how do we partner with families? How do we engage families? What's the one thing we could do? And I say a little bit sarcastically, stop disengaging them. So I don't know how that is sitting with people, and I apologize if it feels a little pushy or challenging there. But I would say you saw that video about this idea of non-linearity. So non-linearity, you might also think of in like as like quantum, or you might think of it as exponential. So like one little act can have this great positive impact across the whole system. Well, one little bad act can do the same thing. So a family calling the office and the person in the office being rude to you on the phone, no one else may ever even know it happened, and it may be the end of that family member partnering with the school, with them showing up to events, with them calling you back, emailing you back. Like, there are all these little moments all day, all week, all year long where it's possible families are being actively disengaged. And so those events we do are nice, but they're not really going to be what's needed, right? If families are being inadvertently disengaged, and this could be racism, bias, classism, it could just be lack of familiarity, fear on the, it could be overworked. It could be like, there's so many root causes of that. So anyone want to comment, connect with me on this idea of disengagement? You're welcome to unmute or type into the chat box. I love the comments in the chat box so far. I'm glad that these things are connecting for folks. Thank you for that.
One thing I think of is that it has to, and you kind of alluded to this when you spoke about that one beautiful person, and the other person commented that when that one beautiful person leaves, that the planning or the activities leave with them. I think it's important that this sort of culture of engagement comes from the top down. It really needs to come from leadership. They really have to embrace it, because oftentimes it requires a paradigm shift in our thinking, right?
Yes.
And so we need to understand the importance of the intentionality of it.
Yes.
And we need to begin to build that mindset.
Yeah. I love that, Debbie. You got a lot of people connecting with you in the chat box. I love that. And what I would say is, I'm not aware, I try to be absorbed in the research and literature on MTSS and school improvement in general. I'm not aware of any other single process or topic like family partnerships that has as far-reaching effects. So the research on family partnerships says, when we get family partnerships right, we improve academic achievement, behavior, attendance, social emotional learning, right? Like it's infinite, it's everything, graduation. And yet, why would it get the least time and energy? It's the one thing that you get the most out of more than anything else. And so to your point, it has to be considered as a goal. It has to be everyone's priority. It has to be something everyone cares about. So I appreciate you all being here, caring about this right now today. So what I want to do as my time's coming to a close is now introduce a few constructs that might help you through this process. And I'm of course not going to give any of them enough time, but I kind of really wanted to share all this with you. So I knew I was going to push it a little bit. Some of you might know of the ladder of student participation, and it is from, you see here cited, it's a much older thing that I've seen being kind of resurrected recently from Roger Hart. So the ladder of student participation, well, I just modified it to be family participation. It did not need any other changes other than substituting student and family. And it's this idea of really trying to value. I know our next session is going to talk about fidelity. So like really, how far are the things we're doing? How good are they? How much quality indicator do they meet? And how much are we doing them with fidelity? So if you see here, like at the bottom, it's like not real family partnerships. It's like putting family members on a team so you can say you have a family member on the team, right? And we've all seen and felt that before. And then all the way to the top. And so this would be my test for any site. And you could do this and take this out to others and say, how often do one or a group of family members approach you as a leader or as a teacher with an idea that they want to implement in order to somehow help or improve the school or the life of their children or the community or whatever? How often is it family initiated? And I would argue probably not very often. And that's the ultimate sign of the trust, of the relationship, of the co-equal joint planning essence that a site has created. So then if you see like one down, it's like families are just doing these things on their own. They are all about helping their children, their community. They're not even reaching out to ask the school to help. but they are like being contributing members of society for the school. And we know, please note, like there is, this is not about poverty. There aren't communities there aren't like whole communities where the people don't care and aren't going to do these things. So that's a whole nother thing to address. But have we empowered, have we motivated, have we connected with families enough that they want to do these things related to school? And then again, you can keep going down. Each step is like a little less, but staff initiated shared decision-making with families. The third step is a great step to be on. It's all good if that's where people are at, and that's having family members on teams with you, helping you to make the decision. So that's huge. So I hope the idea of the ladder will let you you could throw up whatever practices you're doing up against that ladder and see where they fall, and kind of set some goals. Then the second construct, real quickly, is the idea of the dual capacity framework, which it sounds like a lot of you know about. If you want to know more about it, I did put a piece of work from Karen Mapp in your folder, so you can read more about this. And then this is their upgraded graphic. And the reason I really want to bring this into the conversation around systems is how are we readying the adults or the educators to be good partners with the families? So to Debbie and other people's points, are our leaders getting training and support on how to be good partners? Are our teachers getting good training and support on how to be good partners? Or is everything we're doing about the families, right? Like, is it all like how families could change and be different, right? Or are we doing for the educators as well? And then the third construct is this idea of doing all of the above through multi-tiers. So, a multi-tiered system of support is supposed to be additive. Each layer comes in addition to the other. And so you can actually use this kind of 3-tiered system of support. I gave you 2 worksheets in your folder. You could think of how are we supporting staff? So this fits with that dual capacity framework. How are we supporting all, some, and few staff? Both because maybe they have some struggles with family partnerships. Like, are we able to use data and interact with people and help them improve? For staff who need maybe additional support to be good at partnering with families. And then what about staff who are like leaders in this area? Are we empowering staff to maybe be leaders at tier 2 or tier 3? And then similarly, how are we using the 3-tiered model around family partnerships? And so how are we supporting all, some, and few families based on what they need from us, right? How are we reaching out? How are we supporting them getting what they need? But the opportunities for families is really this asset-based lens where we remember that MTSS is not just about deficits. It's also about, supporting family leadership and them leading the way with so much of this work. So here's a very quick example, and then I'm going to be wrapped with you guys. So Ari Slata is a parent I met a decade or so ago, and she was in the 2nd largest school system in Illinois. And in that district, some of you might know, I don't know how much they're still doing this right now. So some of you already know what district that is. And you could look up, they were doing some exceptional work around this area then. So the classroom did some things to create this situation where Ari Slata felt like she was respected and she got involved in her child's schooling. She would read the notices and stay in touch and then formed a good relationship with the teacher. So you can imagine, what training and support did the teacher have to be, ready to be a good partner with all families? And Ari Slata would tell you, her parents, she grew up with parents saying like, they don't be hands off with school education, that, it's the school's job and then their job is home. And it's actually out of respect that they actually don't get overly involved in the school. So, it took some work to have Ari Slata look at that a little bit differently. So then the second thing is the school having systems of support where they support volunteering. So Ari Slata could be a volunteer at the school. She started spending more time there, really starting to feel like she was part of the community, which led to her applying for and joining what they called the Hispanic Parent Leadership Institute. And at the time they had African American Parent Leadership Institute, because they realized like a lot of the families who were running for the board, people were running for the board, people were on the PTA, PTO, and doing all other kinds of things in the community, did not represent all the cultures of their district. So how do we empower, how do we give more shared knowledge, co-equal planning to our families? And so they had these leadership institutes. So she, probably would not have applied for that and been part of that process. had those other steps not have been in place. So I think, I'll leave you with this idea of what do you think of when you think of family voice? And, has family voice been sort of systematized into the way that the rest of the system runs? Is it interrelated, interdependent? Are we giving families voice on teams, in meetings? And the one I most likely like to say is like, when families complain, when they have a problem, are we turning that into a positive? So just the other day, I talked to a leader at a high school. The administrator said that this father had some complaints, and the administrator really values like getting right back to the parent, following up, closing the loop. They formed a good relationship. We were talking the other day about how do we make summer school fun? How can we like really help engage the kids? And so we planned together, and he was going to now follow up with that dad and ask the dad for thoughts and ideas, and to see if the dad could maybe get some other dads together to see how they could all work together to help make summer school more fun. And to me, that's like such a great example of co-equal joint planning. And sorry, Jennifer, I think I stole a couple extra minutes.
That's okay. That's okay. Patty and Amy are very forgiving, and
Thank you.
certainly I could tell how engaged folks were, as well as myself, and how much thinking was going on. You're great at prompting our thinking about these things. And I was thinking back to when I was at an SEA and how important our state director of special education thought it was to have critical friends. So when somebody had a big voice about something that was going wrong in the state, a family member, the idea was, let's use that. They have a lot of interests. They really care. They have some ideas about how things could be better. Let's use that. And so, at least at the time I was at that state, they had some really nice partnerships going on. In some ways they were ahead of the game, but I feel like family engagement is one of those areas where you make some movements forward. Sometimes you make movements back. It's not necessarily a straight line.
Yes.
But we have a lot of thank yous in the chat. Turning to a positive. Yep. And I also, Kimberly did a great job of connecting her content with what we heard last time around. And our last director's webinar, we heard from the Minneapolis Public Schools talking about parent participatory evaluation, PPE. So if you weren't here for that or didn't hear South Dakota's description of how they're evaluating family engagement, please do go back and look at the recording, watch the recording, look at the resources. Fantastic as well. Really thinking about deep engagement via evaluation, and also, okay, how are we doing on family engagement and how can we continuously improve from the South Dakota folks? So this was a great, I don't know if it's a next step again, I don't know if it's linear, but also really important thinking about, how we think about how we conceptualize our work together, and some reminders of why it's important, and lots of great resources for us to look at after this. So thank you so much, Kimberly, for your time. I really appreciate it. Okay, thanks. And so next we have Patty Noonan and Amy Gommer Erickson. They are evaluators for Florida, Kansas, and Oregon for the SPDIGs. They also have created the observation checklist for high quality professional development and the coaching checklist, which I'm probably not going to get the name right if I try to say that, which are tools that are used quite often by the SPDIGs. And I know the HQPD tool was just referenced in a webinar by Lead for Literacy a little earlier. So it's used far and wide. They could tell you some interesting different groups that have brought them in for consultation about that. But today they're going to be talking about thinking through the content that you want to be, they'll say it better than I am, but we think a lot about with the HQPD, it's about how you do your training, right? We want it to be engaging. We're using the adult learning principles. So you're giving them the information, the participants information beforehand that helps them connect with what they're going to be learning, be prepared for it. When they're in the learning, they're engaging actively. They're, participants with you in the training. So you're the trainer. And then they're evaluating their mastery of it and how they're going to use it afterwards. So those are some of the aspects of adult learning principles. But also important is not just how you do your training, but how you give the information, right? Because you want to build typically skills in your training. You should expect to assess the skills that have been acquired by your participants. And if the content's not getting across, then you can't do that. Therefore, you can't get to implementation fidelity. And so they're going to dig a little bit more into that within the college and career competency framework and the social emotional learning and some other things that they've been working on. So I'm going to hand it over to Patty and Amy.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name's Patty Noonan. I hope you can hear me okay. With me is Amy Gummer Erickson. Amy, do you want to wave? So we do know some of you as long time evaluators for SPIDIG projects. We are associate research professors at KU with PhDs in secondary school reform. And about 10 years ago, we began developing an SEL curriculum, which you may or may not know about. We haven't had the opportunity to present to SIG Network on this. So it has been a passion project for sure. And we have put a lot of love, time, and energy into creating this Tier 1 SEL curriculum. And so thank you for inviting us to share it today. We'd also like to acknowledge the states that we've partnered with in this work and making it come into fruition, specifically Kansas, Missouri, Arizona, and Texas. I think some of you all are on the call, couldn't have done it without you. When I say an SEL curriculum, it didn't start that way, but it has emerged to be all the pieces of a curriculum. And so we have instructional practices, lessons, learning targets that are met across time. We have measures to assess student learning or knowledge, but also students' performance, their behaviors, and how their behaviors grow and change and develop over time. And then with that, we provide high quality professional development, coaching. We have implementation tools, fidelity tools, parent training, training of trainers. It's just evolved into something we love, we're proud of, and we're, again, very happy to share it with you today. I have put the purpose of our very quick presentation in the chat box to keep me on track, but also be clear what we're doing here. We really want to show you how we use multiple data sources to promote quality implementation. So this is educators learning what we're teaching them, teaching it well to students, and making sure students are learning and growing in that social emotional learning competency. In addition to making sure our trainers are providing the same content and the same quality of professional development and coaching, and that we understand how schools are progressing in this over time and making sure that they're working through the implementation science stages and progressing. So there's going to be a lot of
question.
Yeah.
I think it didn't, I don't see it in the chat, what you, so maybe you just sent
I have to hit enter.
Yeah, there it is. Thanks.
And there it is. And that is our mission here with this short time together. Two other things I want to say. We have an OSEP presentation this summer at the summer conference on a similar topic. So while this is probably going to get cut short and I'm not going to adequately address many things at all, I'm just going to give you some links and tools and highlights. We'll talk about it more then. And you're always free to reach out to Amy or I if you want to talk about, even if you just want to talk about it, Tier 1 SEL. Like I said, it's something we enjoy talking about, thinking about, working on. We're always open to that conversation. I'll also say now we're looking for another state to partner with. If you are thinking about adopting a CL1 Tier 1 initiative, we have the capacity for working with an additional state. So just throwing that out also. Okay, so this is our framework. The how, this is obvious. This is with all evidence-based quality projects or interventions. We want to think about it as tiered supports, I've acknowledged off the bat that this is a tier 1 SEL curriculum. So what it's meant to do is give explicit instruction and practice with feedback to students, to all students. It was designed for middle and high school students, but recently we've had to pull it down and work to get some instructional activities for the lower grades due to districts wanting to go district-wide. It has a lot of DBDM in it. And what's cool about it is the measures and protocols and actually work to provide an evaluation at the same time also. So educators and high school leadership and districts understand how they're progressing, but we do too. That's the thing, I guess, about being an evaluator and a PD provider. It pushes you to try and have those things make sense and gel together. Okay, and we care a lot about the intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies taught to all students, so we use the implementation stages. I talked about that. The first one being exploration, then it goes to installation, initial implementation, full implementation, sustainability. So one key piece in our exploration is educators really have to think about SEL, dabble in it a little bit, think about how it could work in their practice, when they could provide instruction, how they could make connections to that in their classrooms, what these things really even are, especially if they didn't get that in pre-service. And then schools, educators and schools determine one competency to focus on at a time. And then we have activities and we facilitate things to get their buy-in, such as student surveys, educator surveys, and then a plan for professional development is made. Do you want to click on the implementation process? I'm just thinking we'll click on some of these things so you can get to them later and check them out. But we early on had to create a way that educators or districts could quickly interact with the information to learn more wherever they were in the process to get started. So we designed this tool around questions so they can really get a sense of what quality implementation takes and looks like from the very beginning. In addition to this, we also started making educator and leadership videos. We thought of them originally as testimonial videos, but they're really just people doing the work, talking about what they did and the impact or outcome that they have seen from doing it in various classrooms and school settings. And that has really helped increase our educator buy-in and leadership understanding what they're adopting when they sign on and plan the professional development, coaching, measures, and all the things that go through it. I think we've all learned from SPIDIGS how important good selection is, and that educators and leadership understand the extent of what they're signing up for, what student results they'll see, what is the impact of this amount of professional development and coaching, and how that ties to the problems or needs they're seeing in their classroom with their students. So we try to establish much, if not all of that in the beginning. And then, okay, so part of buy-in or exploration is free resources and tools. If we forget to say this, there's a link in the chat box to CCC Framework, our main site. We have so many free resources and tools. Here's a smattering of what they look like, but some of the ones that are a big hit with middle and high school teachers in particular, although we have elementary stuff on there too, are the Padlets. I don't know if you've seen these, they're like Pinterest, but we have curated what's on there so it gels with the research or the literature reviews that we've done on the competencies. Amy's showing that you can navigate the site with a rollover or scroll down and they're in a list, but all this is free and open access. So this is not the professional development on the, lessons, instructional activities, the whole thing. This is all about exploration, getting teachers to interact with the research and the concepts in advance before we start working with them. There's also you don't have to go to the same year, you can if you want, but a free assessment site on this that anyone's welcome to use where teachers can launch formative questionnaires and knowledge tests on various competencies, and students can get real-time results, and teachers can get summarized or individual student results pre and post. So we'll talk about that more, but the data is also a piece of exploring. You can test yourself or test your kids to sort of see where we are with this and if this really is a need in our school. Or you can ask kids via a self-assessment or needs assessment, which ones of these competencies do you need the most support or work in? And they'll tell you. So again, you'll probably have to go back to this later. We don't have a lot of time, but these are the competencies that floated to the top, meeting adolescents, 7th through 12th graders. And this only represents Kansas students. We have tens of thousands of students that have taken this at this point, have said, I need support in these competencies. So if you go back to the wheel, we have categorized 26 competencies in 3 domains. So the intrapersonal or internal self-reflective processes, interpersonal or between people, collaborative communication stuff, or the cognitive. Traditionally, schools have focused heavily on the cognitive domain, although we are asked for support in that also at times. I think we consider SEL the red and the blue domains. The big thing, we made this, I guess, in 2013, Amy, we've been at it for a bit. So the reason we created this and designed this is these competencies, if you will, or sets of skills that are transferable can all be taught. That's a big thing. You can teach these to students. They're not traits. It's not that some kids have them or not. They can be taught them. There are demonstrable behaviors or skills you can see when you do teach them it to make sure they have learned it. So maybe a set of knowledge and behaviors you can do once you're taught them. And research has shown that if you do it, there is in-school and post-school impact. One other big point about SEL, not everyone knows or talks about, but SEL hugely, massively impacts academics. It isn't separate. We don't do SEL and academics separately. To teach kids how to self-regulate or be assertive and ask for help when they need it, or to be more self-aware, empowers them to be better learners, to take more control of their learning, to take more responsibility. And that's what teachers actually tell us, those words. So they're connected, they're strongly connected. And in teaching these SEL competencies, yes, we're building them, but really we are going back to that first slide of creating more career-equipped, socially, emotionally engaged, lifelong learners, which is our why. So moving on, we gave you a little article to read about assertiveness. So we thought this was sort of interesting that it represents 3 middle schools. We worked with a lot of schools during COVID. They were highly impressive in what they did during this year in terms of, shifting their actual content and daily instruction to virtual, but also sticking with this and providing kids SEL instruction and practice during the same crazy time. So we decided to write an article about these 3 impressive middle schools in particular who took on assertiveness, but there were dozens and dozens of schools that kept with it. So assertiveness, just so you all know, it isn't being loud, being dominant, saying what I want over everyone else. It's these 2 things. So it's expressing your wants, needs, and thoughts, but at the same time, also respecting what others want, need, think. So what it is really is respectful communication. But, like anything, there's a lot of underlying things. For one thing, for students, do they know what they want? Do they know what their emotions are? Can they describe those or communicate those at the moment, especially a challenging moment? Can they clearly ask for things respectfully? To respect someone, you actually have to have a little bit of understanding or perspective taking of that person, a little bit of empathy, the ability to listen, possibly. So all of these underlying skills go into what assertiveness is. We start by teaching adults, educators, the difference between passive, aggressive, and assertive. In the middle, nonverbal, verbal behaviors, scenarios, all sorts of things. What are the differences between those three communication styles? And Amy's moving me on because I could talk about this, I don't know, for 12 hours easily. So my point is there are learning targets, a set of skills, and these middle schools learned them as adults, taught them to students, made connections in their classrooms, provided practice with feedback, and measured it over the school year. We have a lot of data pieces along the way to track their progress and how they're doing and how the students are doing, and dip in when we can, when we need to. And so we're just wondering what pieces you have in your programs or projects. I don't know if you've used Menti before, but you can hold your phone up to this or go directly to the link, which I don't know, do we want to stick that in the chat? Or I guess you go to menti.com and you can type that code in, and then we'll pull up the results really quickly. But we're wondering, in a program or project you're working on, that your SPIDIG's working on, which of these pieces have you included in it for evaluation or data? Part of the reason we're asking you to do this is we didn't have all these data pieces in the beginning in 2012. We did little by little add them, make them, improve them. And then we really started using them, both to communicate results to leadership or back to educators participating. And then as we kept building them and making them and using them, they started working as a package, if you will, to really help us take the pulse of a school's progress and be able to intervene when needed with coaching or booster trainings or meetings with leadership or whatever. But we're improving even right now to where this data, we can be more responsive, which is our vision. So I see we have less assessing buy-in, sure. We're heavily doing the quality of the training, yay, way to go, EBPD rubric and the quality of coaching. We are kind of getting to the assessing, or beginning to, but not as much, self-efficacy, short-term student growth, intermediate student outcomes. So that's not surprising. As I said, it took us a bit to put all these pieces in place and see how they work together, and that collection of evaluation or data pieces help us do a better job for sure, but also fulfill our evaluation requirements. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the professional development, the coaching, and what it is, because I think I have to for you to understand the data pieces. But I'm going to try and be fast. So basically they get 12 hours of virtual PD divided into 4 sessions across the school year. This is just an example of what the middle school dosage is. There is also a couple team coaching sessions that happen in between the training sessions. At the training sessions, educate all the teachers, counselors, special educators, related services in a school participate. They learn as adults and go through activities around, learning targets. And then they learn a variety of instructional practices that they could take and go teach students to that learning target. Then they learn ways other teachers and various content areas have connected to or promoted practice with feedback in those same learning targets. And they get more content in each session. So 3 learning objectives, session 1, 3, session 2, 3, session 3, coach, and they're expected to go teach in between to assess student learning, to reflect on their instruction for refinement later. And then it concludes with all school reflection planning. What are we keeping in place? what are we going to make sure we do next year? What worked well? What do we want to be different? What do we want to add on? That type of thing. And then we also work with the SEL coaches, instructional coaches, and principals across that time period too. SEL coaches, one of their functions too is to provide family trainings, which we've developed, and to communicate and engage families in the work. We have a participant packet, lessons, student workbook, resources that go with participants across the school year that they fill out, work through, engage in the online training. We have, just so you know, we have the lessons and student workbooks in English and Spanish and parent PDFs and all that stuff. So the point, I guess, would be that educators get this right off the bat in the beginning, and then they're clear what the expectation is across the year. They receive a practice profile and they begin to understand what that means. They understand some of the fidelity and reflection pieces that are also in place. This is just an overview of the types of things they learn in assertiveness, but each of these 8 lessons has a unique learning target and about, 8 instructional activities, how you could meet the learning target. So what this really represents is probably 40 to 45 hours of stuff to teach assertiveness. Educators don't do that. To be super clear, that's not what happens. What happens is there's choice involved. So educators decide which of these things, instructional practices, will work for me to meet this learning target. Which of the, so these are what the lessons look like. And you'll see, do you want to do the first learning target of, I think it's what assertiveness is and the difference between passive aggressive and assertive. Well, first talks about the pre-test, but basically the content is chunked around learning targets. They learn, they implement, and then they reflect how it went. Okay, so also we have lots of interactivity where this is a buy-in activity, where educators actually imagine right off the bat in these various classroom situations. Now that you have a sense of what assertiveness is, what would it really look like if a student were being assertive in group work, in their interactions with you as a teacher, with boundaries, with their peers? And so this is just an example of one middle school where each educator, or sometimes they do this in small, I guess in this one, they responded by their letters of their last name. I don't know if you guys use these, but they're great Padlets for interaction or to sort of capture groupthink and to, collaboratively construct something. So we do this a lot in our trainings and have found that leadership and educators really like it as sort of an archive of the best thinking at the moment. So activities like that can increase teacher buy-in, especially as each educator has a voice and posts. I talked about that there's a knowledge pre-post test, and that I mentioned the assessment site, which you saw. So part of it's a reflective self-assessment. Another is an actual measure of comprehension. In a little bit, we'll show you some of the pre-test results and pre-post test results so you can see. But glancing at this, you can see there are right and wrong answers. There is definitely content that's taught that which of these 3 options best describes an assertive statement. So students can take this. That is another thing that can get buy-in for staff and for students. When you have your whole class, testing or coming out at a 60%, which is not unusual, or high 50s, low 60s for how much they can answer correctly on a pre-test, it actually can build student buy-in to the idea that they don't know everything there is to know about assertiveness, or even educators understanding too that they just don't know it. And so, if students come to us without literacy skills, we teach them. And I think SEL is changing to be no different. If they come to us, instead of just sort of admiring the problem or maybe even possibly blaming or something like that, we don't care about that anymore. We just teach it. And we assess it and teach it to the best of our abilities, because in that way we have better learners in our classroom. Okay. So Amy on the PowerPoint, I think, did put a code in there that you can go take the knowledge test, the self-assessment, if you're curious. We set that up for you. I mentioned too that teachers choose how they'll meet the learning target for their students. Here's just a little example of data we collect at the end of each session, where they choose from various instructional activities of what they're going to go do. And they'll choose different things depending on the students they're supporting or teaching. And they may add or modify, which is fine. But I think the point here is we collect this. So teachers create a plan of how they'll provide instructional activity along with practice and connections in their classroom. We get that plan. And then so we know what they're going to go do and can customize our coaching or our emails to them, individualized emails, touching base with them along the way. This is just an example of how they brainstorm application in various classrooms around the same assertiveness learning targets. So then at the end of each session, we have educators assess their efficacy, so their confidence for doing what we believe we've taught them to do, which we haven't always taught them to do, as you guys know. So they rate their confidence that they can teach these things we've taught them to teach, that they can connect and give practice in their classrooms. Their confidence that they'll see kids actually learn and grow, and that what they do will have meaning in these students' behavior or academic outcomes. This is pretty common of how they come back, where we have most of the responses between 3 and 5, but definitely some 1s and 2s there. And you know, you could actually try and look into giving extra supplemental support to available, you know, for educators who don't have the confidence that you want them to have at this moment or point. Okay, so you might also discuss with leadership, reteach, that type of thing. These are 6 instructional criteria that we design all our work around. They are similar to if you're teaching biology, English language arts, math, whatever content. These are sort of the recipe, if you will, for a quality instruction to get kids to actually learn, and not just learn, but be able to generalize what they're learning to other situations. And so if we had time, I'd ask you to go through these and annotate each one I've mentioned so far. But that's available to you to use also. We've actually had a couple states request it. This is the pre-test results for around, I don't know, 480 students, something like that. No, whatever. I'm not going to do math. So we have the questionnaire results up top. This is the self-assessment questions. And then we have actual knowledge summarized test items below. I said a lot came back in the high 50s, low 60s. Actually, this is more, these kids are testing in the 40% correct on the knowledge test items. Again, this is pre-test data, can be used for buy-in. Kind of interesting, we can look at boys versus girls, grade levels, all that stuff. This is educator data, where when they come back from having learned it, taught it, been coached on it, they come to get more, and they take a moment prior to self-assess how well as an educator was I able to address each learning target from the lessons I was supposed to go teach. So we get data like this all the time too. So in the chat box, if anyone wanted to post a takeaway to this data, the blue is they fully taught it. You can see lesson 1, 2, and 3. Orange is somewhat taught. Gray is not taught. And so this actually facilitates discussion for this school. It was really clearly, okay, well, we were really able to do 1, not as well 2, less 3. So we need to go back and reteach or teach for the first time some of this. We also have a clear group of educators, around 8 or 9 of them, that don't think it's their job, or they're coming to training, but for some reason not thinking it's part of what they do to provide this instruction to anyone. So there are things to talk about and work on, overcoming barriers, anything. I mean, from data like this. And we do this repeatedly, ask these same questions around different learning targets. I did want to make some really quick connections to lesson study. It's something that some of us in SIG Network have been thinking about lately, learning about. And I was going to ask you to annotate which of these you think we've hit in our work. And it's kind of interesting. We don't do it perfectly exactly like lesson study, but this is our cycle where educator, and by that, each educator studies, each educator makes a plan. There's no team plan or grade plan. Each person makes their plan for instruction. They do it, they reflect on it, and the cycle continues. And it's more and more and more looping back over the school year or multiple school years. Okay, so I mentioned we have other types of assessment. Let's look at the competency sequence. This is really assertiveness, pieces of assertiveness laid out over stages. So students can use this to self-assess, but these are really behaviors or things you can see develop, emerge, increase over time. Educators can select ones they're going to look for and set up scenarios in their classroom to observe and actually use this, not as a screener, but more of how students are progressing, demonstrating the skills over time. So you can use it multiple times and have these as your look fors. We also have pretty systematic coaching, team coaching that occurs because we want to promote collaboration and them being able to answer questions for each other. We have assessments around climate, school climate, culture, how well they do various things on the educator practice profile. I think we're running out of time. Amy, do you want to add anything?
Sure. So this kind of gets us to, the meat of the data and how it's used by all levels of the system. So data is being used by students for self-reflection, by teachers to look at their implementation and where students need additional support, by entire teams looking at the school-wide impacts as well as their overall buy-in and implementation. But then even at that higher level, we also look at the data for trainers and for coaches and identifying those commonalities and differences between the HQPD, which is that adult learning methods within training, and content fidelity, which is actually teaching assertiveness effectively. Are you hitting the important constructs of assertiveness? So both of those are measured for trainers, both new and on an annual basis. And then we also measure some of the quality of coaching. So asking participants for feedback regarding the coaching, but additionally observing coaching. And with Zoom, it's so easy now because it can be videoed and we can look at it with the coach later to have both a self-reflection and a coaching session with those actual coaches. So we were going to do this great activity at the end, but we are out of time. We really wanted to connect this back to the first session and talk about making the connections between systems, practices, and data. But thanks for having us.
It was a good idea. I like it a lot. I wanted to highlight a few things that to me are interesting, and hopefully to all of you. So we had the Carnegie Corporation come on a few months ago for a director's webinar, and they were talking about the importance with some of their partners. They were talking about the importance of high quality curriculum materials, which is not to be confused with evidence-based curriculum materials. And I think it was interesting to me that you all had some chats about that because you want both, right? You want high quality materials that have what you need so that you can use them well, but that the practices those curriculum materials support are actually evidence-based. And so that was, I hope you heard both of those things and what Patty and Amy were saying. They are purveyors at this point in the implementation science language or the National Implementation Research Network language. which means they have created something and then are helping it to be used elsewhere. I think it's the helping it to be used elsewhere that's the important part of the purveyor part. And you don't see that all that much anymore. Sometimes, something has been developed and then it's handed off and then everyone else takes care of the next part, the implementation. I think another example of that, it's not a curriculum per se, but positive behavioral interventions and supports, where, University of Oregon and other universities work together to create this. And then they took their show on the road and they helped it to be, they helped to train people to do coaching, and they were all over the country doing that. And I think it made a big difference for that continuous improvement of the curriculum, right? From what I was hearing, you're making changes, you're thinking about what families need, you're thinking about what teachers need, what the students need, how to evaluate it, et cetera, which I don't think you see that often in curricula. So I think you brought just some really good points up with that. And then at the very end, we're talking about what is the content that you want to be learned in the training? What are the skills that you want people to have? And therefore, this is what you need to cover in the training in order for those skills to be possible for the participants, and really thinking about that fidelity. I know it's like so many fidelity aspects. There's the coaching, but this is another part. There's how you use adult learning principles, and then there's what you actually want to get across with your training. And so that was another important point. So thank you so much, Patty and Amy, for spending time putting this together, spending time with us today. You've always been great partners. Thank you for everyone who participated in the polls and in the chat and spoke up during Kimberly's presentation. This has been great information. And as always, this is a great family where we get to learn together and then hopefully share our learning with others.